Welcome to Light in the Shadow. I'm Dana Kenyon, and it's my aim to encourage, support, and equip women to live life under the shadow of God's wing. On this channel, I'll be bringing you videos of women who are doing just that. I hope their stories will help you find your path in His kingdom. Under His shadow is where we can walk in His protection, receive His provision, and rest in His care. Together, we will be light under the shadow of His wing.
Okay, sounds good.
Well, welcome back to Light in the Shadow. Today I have a special treat. I get to interview Courtney Williams. I met Courtney quite a while ago in Dickinson, North Dakota, where her and my daughter were friends. They were going to church together, raising their families together, kind of doing life together. At that time, Courtney, you were teaching in a Christian school there in Dickinson. Your husband, Bobby, had a contracting business, building houses and all that kind of stuff. My son actually worked for him for a little bit, so that was kind of fun. And there they were raising their three little blonde-haired cuties. And they had just built, I think that you had just built this big house. And I remember you just having people over and just wanting to share that space with other people. And that was just an encouragement to me and fun. So welcome to the program today.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. Yeah, that's what it was like back then, but things are quite different today than they were, was that 9 years ago now?
that was a long time ago. All right. You started with 3 kids and now you have 9.
Yeah, 9 kids. I can't even believe it myself, but 9 kids, and we've fostered roughly 41 kiddos in our home as well. So that's right at 50 kids that have been in our house as a parent figure. Yeah, definitely. It's wild, it's crazy, but it's been good. I honestly never would have thought this would be our story and this is where we'd be. But it's just become part of our family. It's just who we are now. It's what God created us for, and we truly trust in Him and believe, that we're going to just keep doing what He has for us until we're old and gray. When we moved to Colorado, going on 4 years ago now, we actually thought we were done fostering because we had a lot of placements in North Dakota, a lot of short-term placements, and we lived in that big, beautiful house. And when we moved down here, we had a much smaller house. Colorado's market is quite different than North Dakota.
Yeah.
We had a much smaller house, and my husband and I just kind of felt like, hey, we've done enough of this in a sense, we're done. But our kids had a different plan. Actually, shortly after moving here, our daughter wrote a letter to us petitioning and saying, like, this is God's plan for our family. We have extra beds, we have extra space, we'll share beds, yeah, all this story. And then she got all of her siblings to sign it. So all 7 of them at that time signed off saying, yes, we all agree that what we should be doing. So they petitioned us to foster in Colorado. And it was kind of hard to look at that letter from your kids and say no, when your kids are saying, you guys have told us this is God's plan for our story. How can we really say no to that? So here we are fostering again in Colorado. And just really, I think we've gone a few times up and down of really feeling like we had to hold our family so closely. And even through certain trauma things that happen, or just certain tough situations that come into our home through this life, you kind of go through those things. And a lot of times we feel like, okay, we're done, we're over this. We need to hold our family like in this little bubble. And I feel like sometimes we ourselves, but even other people, will hold family as an idol. We talk about all these idols people have. And I feel sometimes the family unit is an idol, where we hold it too closely and don't welcome other people because we're afraid.
That's important for people to know. Hey, go back just a little bit in your story and tell us about you and Bobby kind of coming to faith in Christ together. How did that look?
Yeah, interesting journey. So we both grew up in Christian homes. We both have great parents, grew up going to church, doing all those things. But for some reason, neither of us really understood our faith. We never owned our faith. It was just kind of something we did. So when we got married, we kind of felt like, oh, well, we're married now, we have kids, we should go to church. We started looking for a church. In the meantime, we had moved back to North Dakota. and had 2 kiddos at that time. And so we started looking for a church, and we ended up going to the Evangelical Bible Church, which is where I met you and your daughter.
Uh-huh.
And it was the first time we'd gone to a church that was like an evangelical type, more modern type church. And so it was weird to us. We went that first time and we were both like, I remember feeling very uncomfortable. But yet the people were so welcoming and so loving that we just kept going. And after we kept going and actually had Bibles, we didn't even know where our Bibles were in our own house before this. Got some for our, graduation or some point. We had received Bibles before that, but never opened them up in our home. So we started to read our Bibles. We started to open up the Bibles. And then the more we went to this church, it was like we kept hearing gospel and we couldn't even describe that word, neither of us. If you had said to me, 10 years ago, describe the word gospel, I would have been like, I don't have a clue what you mean. But it wasn't like this one defining moment of, hey, we became believers and understood at this one moment, but it was just kind of this growth process of the 2 of us opening up God's word for the first time, starting to do that together, going to church, and then having people wrap around us that were pouring into our lives, that we just started to understand the gospel and understand who Jesus was and made that complete transformation in our lives. Yeah, probably about 11 years ago now. Yeah.
That is a beautiful story. I love that God did that together for the 2 of you. You told me about this sort of enlightenment period in your life as you kind of got to know the Bible, and you had kind of dealt with some infertility during that time, correct?
Yep.
And had talked about adoption, but hadn't ever really gotten serious about that. So what was it that changed your direction toward adoption?
Yes, like you said, we dealt with infertility when we first got married, and we had talked about adopting. This was prior to Christ. We had been talking about adoption just because we thought it was our only option of having kids. Really, that was why it was the only option. And I'd always said I was going to adopt, but I never really thought I would. But it's always been something that was intriguing to me. But I didn't have anyone in my life that had done it, so I didn't really know or have that experience. But we became believers and started reading our Bible. And I was up one night actually reading a book. It was a memoir of Mary Beth Chapman, who's Stephen Curtis Chapman's wife, and their story of adoption and some hard stuff they've gone through. And I was reading her book and she started mentioning some verses that talk about caring for orphans. And I was like, what? This is in the Bible to care for orphans? Like I didn't know that. So I got up really late one night and I was flipping through my Bible and finding these verses and highlighting them. And I woke Bobby up in the middle of the night and was like, did you know that caring for orphans is in the Bible? Like we've always said we're going to adopt, but it's in the Bible. We're Christians now. We better do this. And we had, crazy enough, we had already gotten licensed to foster before becoming believers. We had already gone through that process, but then we never took any placements because then we started having, again, through that infertility, got licensed, and then we started to have kids, and then we were scared. Again, going back to that scared, are we going to ruin our kids? Can we bring kids into our home? What's going to happen? But then it was in the Bible and it was like, oh my goodness, we better get to this. And so we just totally jumped on board and kind of said, we're going to recklessly live for him. No matter what that looks like, we're all in.
So here you are, brand new believers, and you're convinced that God wants you to adopt because it's in the Bible.
Yeah.
Good job. Yes, I love that. You see it in the scripture and you say, okay, well, that's what we're doing. But that kind of became your soapbox issue, didn't it? Then kind of the thing that you stood on and wondering why maybe other Christians didn't adopt as well.
Yeah, definitely. Like we even, I would say, got to the point, we quickly started a ministry within our church, and it was great that our church leaders backed us on that. Being young believers, they knew that, but they just trusted and saw this passion and fire in us. And so they allowed us to start an orphan care ministry and try to get the church on fire. But through that, I think we had that lens of, okay, it's in the Bible, we're young believers. We didn't fully understand a lot of biblical truths yet at that point. And so we would look at the congregation and be like, why is nobody else adopting? Why is nobody else fostering? We actually got up in front of our church at one point and said, you guys should be fostering and adopting. Like everybody needs to be doing this. It's in the Bible, kind of like that type of soapbox of
right.
How dare they? Yeah.
So you just, brand new Christians, just bounded ahead, throwing caution to the wind, jumped right in.
Yeah, we did. I mean, we definitely still had like that reservation. Like I said, we were scared what it would look like. We were scared. We had, our beautiful blonde haired little kids that we didn't know what that life would look like for us and what it would bring into our home. But I think the biggest thing for me personally was I was really afraid that I wouldn't be able to love a child the same. So it was weird because we had just felt like, okay, we're adopted into God's kingdom. And we saw that parallel of understanding God more through our adoption or through our story of adoption, and wanting to adopt a child. But yet I still feared that I would not love a child as much as I loved my own biological 3 children.
Yeah. Yeah. You said that God kind of took care of that fear for you though, right? You told me that like when you saw the picture for the first time of your first adopted daughter, you just absolutely fell in love.
Yeah, it's one of those craziest things. Actually, it just came up in my Facebook memory last week of the reminder of that anniversary of when I first saw that picture. And I'm tearing up right now because I can remember that so clearly, of just seeing that picture and just trusting and knowing like God has this child for our family, for us to be her mom and dad. And that love question was instantly taken away. And that was just by a picture. She's across the seas, thousands of miles away. And then that first moment when I held her was even a whole nother, it was an instant love that I will never question again.
When you adopted out of birth order, correct? Not the first one, but then going forward, you adopted out of birth order. So was that an issue for you? And how did you deal with that?
Yeah, our biggest issue, honestly, was a lot of things you read and people you talk to say follow birth order, and why it's so important. And a lot of the big psychology behind it, people believe, is the child that is the oldest currently. So Eli was our oldest, and they would say Eli has that biggest, eldest mentality, personality. You can't ruin that in him. And so our biggest fear was Eli, and we had never talked about older children adoption ever. We just didn't even consider it, I guess. Like I said, we didn't know anybody that adopted. We hadn't been in this realm. Our kids weren't around adopted kids. So all our kids knew, again, being young, Eli was 6 at this point, all that they knew was infant adoption. You adopt little babies. And crazy enough, Eli came up to me one night sitting in the living room and said, "Hey, Mom, what if God wanted us to have a bigger brother or sister in this house? Would we have them come into our house? Would we adopt them?" He's asking me like this little kid terms, and I kind of looked at him and was like, "Well, Eli, what would you think about that? You're the oldest brother. You're the big brother. What would you think about having an older brother or sister?" And he just, child of the faith of a child, just looked at me and said, "I've always wanted an older brother or 2. I think it'd be amazing."
Older brother or 2.
Or 2. Yeah. So those fears, as far as Eli went, were quickly removed. And my husband actually didn't even believe that this happened. He's like, "What? You had to have feed him this." I'm like, "I did not, this was truly his doing." So those fears for us were removed, and we felt like Eli was in it. He had that buy-in. But then we had a lot of other questions, struggles, extra trauma when they're older and the things they've experienced. Bringing in a teenager. We've never parented a teenager before, except for a couple very short-term through foster care.
Right.
And it's crazy now. I ask, even though we've gone through all that stuff, the trauma, the struggles, the heartaches, a lot of things in our home, I've asked Eli and our other kiddos, I've asked them, like, "Do you ever regret this decision or that this is the life?" And they've all said, "Absolutely not. I would never change this for anything."
Nice. God's good. He's so good that way. Tell us about your first adopted child, Addie. You adopted her from the Congo, correct?
Yep.
And at the time you had a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old. Addie was 9 months. So tell us about how that changed everything.
Yeah. And crazy enough, when we started the journey of adoption, we started the process through Ethiopia for an infant, a 0 to 2-year-old. So 0 to 2-year-old from Ethiopia, and went through the long paperwork process, all that. And pretty much as soon as we filed all of our paperwork, put down some big checks, the process in Ethiopia changed. There was some things that were going on. So they changed the process. And we were told a 6 to 12 month wait for the child we were hoping to adopt. And as soon as we turned in our paperwork, they had told us it was going to be 3 to 4 years.
Oh,
And our hearts were kind of like, oh, like again, that on fire, like we know God's calling us to adopt. We should adopt right now. And so we ended up doing a concurrent adoption. So we were on the wait list for Ethiopia, adopted Addie from Congo in the meantime with a concurrent adoption. I mean, that adoption from Ethiopia was placed on hold while we went through this process, knowing that we'd get through this process before that one even came to fruition. So then we adopted Addie from Congo in that concurrent time. And we went to Congo, which is actually our very first trip to Africa. And if you know a lot about world poverty and third world countries, a lot of people actually consider Congo a fourth world country. So the poverty there, the needs there are just so strong. And so our hearts were just shaken when we went there, but in so many ways. But one of the biggest ways they were shaken were we went to this orphanage, our first time at an orphanage. And we spent all day there playing. You know, Addie was a little baby, so we were playing with her and holding her, but we were really playing with the older kids and doing activities with them. And throughout the day, just kind of our hearts were just fond of these older kids and their stories. We got to know some of their stories. Yeah, so at one point in the day, one of the older kids actually pulled us aside and was saying, the little babies are always leaving us. We're always left here. And that comment broke our hearts. I mean, we were just broken that they recognized that, and they knew that even this little boy was probably 8 years old, that he recognized, like, here I am in this situation, but these babies are leaving daily. Somebody's coming for a baby. So when we left that day, I mean, one of the moments that is stuck in you forever is driving away from that orphanage. All these older kids are lined up on the porch and they are sobbing, just having us drive away. And I sobbed for hours after that. I mean, it was such a hard moment driving away with our precious little baby. You know, we wanted the healthy little infant. Here she was in our arms, but there were all these kids behind us realizing that they were stuck there. They were staying behind.
You'd mentioned fourth world poverty. What is fourth world poverty?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on it, but really after going to many countries, I can see why Congo is considered a fourth world. It's like what you imagine for third world, but even on a deeper level. The poverty is so extreme. The homelessness, the fatherlessness is beyond. There's actually an index for poverty levels, and Congo has many times over the last 10 years been on dead last out of every country in the nation. On that index level of the comforts of life, the needs of life, war, all those types of things.
Yeah. And so you are driving away from these children in fourth world poverty.
Yeah.
That rips my heart out. I can't imagine if you being there. You talked about later on having a conversation in your hotel room with Bobby.
Yeah, it was hard for us because my husband was a home builder, and we had drawn up our beautiful dream home. I drew the plans for it. We built the home together. His company, bless us, a lot of our own sweat equity, but we had been building this 6,000 square foot home.
Wow.
And here we are in Congo, where things are just, in shambles all around us. We couldn't even leave our hotel. We had bodyguards to leave our hotel because it was unsafe. It was, so it was kind of sad because we didn't really get to see a lot of the country because of the state of the country. But we had that conversation of the hotel of, what are we doing? We are building this ginormous, beautiful home. And look at all these people around us. I mean, our hearts, like I said, it was our first experience, but our hearts were just broken for things we had never experienced before, for that poverty level, for the needs. And here, just the wealth that we were living in, it broke us. And we just radically said, we will do, like, God, we will do anything for you. If that means we need to give up our house, we will do anything for you. We didn't want to, but we had that conversation and those prayers of, God, wreck us for what wrecks you.
It was just after that time when you had that conversation with Eli about adopting older kids. And so you actually changed your request in Ethiopia from babies to older children, and it dramatically reduced your wait time, like from, what did you say, 3 to 4 years to just a couple of months.
Yeah, crazy. So we had decided to change our request to older kids after that conversation with Eli, and we had talked to a couple people and our caseworkers and whatnot, and changed that request. And then we got their referral within a few months. It was crazy. And we were nervous because we didn't have them. And we had just gone through an international adoption. International adoption is not cheap. And we had just gone through that process. And so we were kind of praying through this, like, do we say yes? Do we not? And in the meantime, our next funds that were needed for the Ethiopia adoption, if we were going to move forward a lot quicker, we got a random insurance check in the mail of a trailer back when we had lived in Montana, some insurance claim from years before that we actually had completely forgotten about. Completely forgot about this claim. And here we get a check in the mail. That's the same amount of money that we need to move on the process in Ethiopia to keep going. And again, just a God thing, just like that reminder and those little things that nudged us forward to say, yes, yep, this is God's plan for you. You know, these doors are opening. And so there we are saying yes, and very quickly had the referral of our two boys, Decho and Naji. At the time, they were 9 and 11 when we got the referral.
So you had now 3 new adopted children within a year. You doubled your children. That must have been surreal.
Yes, definitely. It was definitely surreal because they came home. Addie came home in September 30th, and they came home October 1st, and like the next year. So exactly a year apart, pretty much. We had the 3 newly adopted kiddos. And we were still fostering at that point. We went on kind of some mild breaks after kids came home, but then we were still doing emergency placements, short-term placements. So we had a lot of kids in and out of the house, a lot. And it was a crazy time, but it was a good time. You know, our boys didn't know English very well at all. So we have a lot of funny stories, a lot of just fun family memories of those first days and months of getting to know each other and them getting to know our culture because, you know, they were older, so they knew their culture. So there's definitely some hard things that go through that, some great and beautiful things, but some hard things as well when, you know, kids are removed from their culture. So certain things that they would not touch, they would never touch cheese, like at all. We eat a lot of cheese in our family. But then I will never forget the first day they actually ate a grilled cheese sandwich, and they love it now. But back then it was like no cheese at all. Now they will eat melted cheese, but no fresh cheese. Just a lot of fun things that, you know, our kids, it's amazing how God, again, there were hard things, but our kids just had this natural love for one another pretty much from the beginning. Yes, they're siblings, they have their ups and downs, trust me, but just watching the love, like we had our kids take a week off of school when our boys first came home, and we just all spent a week at home together playing and talking and just getting to know one another. And it was just such a beautiful, fun thing for our entire family to walk through.
Yes, I can imagine. I had not, honestly, it's kind of an odd thing, but I never even thought about the language barrier. Did they speak any English when they came?
They had been in the United States for a year with a international children's choir. So they picked up some English, but then they had been back for over a year. And so it was very limited, very, very limited. You know, we could kind of figure each other out, but there were a lot of things that, you know, I could tell you story after story, and still to this day, some of the things, you know, some of the English that we don't recognize happens so young in life that they still struggle sometimes with vocabulary. And we have laughs. Just this week, we had I won't say it because it's kind of embarrassing, but a hilarious story in our home. And it's just fun.
Oh, that's awesome. The cheese, they didn't want to touch cheese. They didn't like it. Why cheese?
It's not very common there. They don't really have cheese. So it's just such a distinct flavor that they're not used to. Pretty much the only thing they have for the most part is goat cheese. Is what we're used to, which they don't like that either. But
you still wanted to adopt even after that. And you thought about wanting to adopt again from Ethiopia. Right? Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's kind of similar to our Congo story. You know, you go there, and in Ethiopia, is a 2-trip process. So we went to Ethiopia twice, and we were there for over a couple weeks time period. And we spent a lot of time at the boys' orphanage, way more than we got to in Congo. And so we got to know some of their friends really well. And so again, that heartbreak of meeting teenagers, meeting their friends that they love, and some of them asking us, some of them flat out asked us, like, would you take me as well? Would you consider adopting me?
Oh,
And so we came home like, oh my goodness, again, like, I know we've got, how many do we have? We had 6 kids at that point. We have 6 kids. That's a lot. We feel like we still have room for more. So our heart really was on the Ethiopian youth. That was now at this point, because Congo had closed their doors. We couldn't adopt from Congo. So we thought, okay, well, we can adopt more older kids from Ethiopia. But sadly, shortly after our boys came home, Ethiopia closed their doors to international adoption. So now that was out of the picture. And we weren't like jumping at doing it. It was just one of those thoughts of, okay, if something presents, or if one of these friends does work out. So there's one young man that we were actually pursuing. Is there a way we could adopt him? And those doors were closed. And so we were just living our life, had our 6 kids, doing foster care. And because we were foster parents in the state of North Dakota, every quarter, I think it was, we'd receive a flyer in the mail that had the waiting children in North Dakota, the kiddos that were waiting for adoption in North Dakota that didn't have a current placement. And I was flipping through this brochure, I did it every once in a while, but I didn't really pay much attention to it. But I flipped and I saw our daughter Hannah's picture, and I could just tell by looking at her, because Ethiopians often have they look Ethiopian. And I was looking and I could tell she was from Ethiopia.
oh.
And I read a little bit about her, and then sure enough, you can go online and read like a bigger biography about her. And I went online and saw she was from Ethiopia. And so my husband Bobby came home that night, and I just had the paper sitting there, and I said, you should just look at this. And he flipped it through and he stopped on her picture, and she said, she's from Ethiopia, isn't she? And he could tell as well. Here she was in foster care in North Dakota, waiting for an adoptive home. And so we started that process, just knowing like here we had this heart for an Ethiopian youth. The doors to adopt from Ethiopia directly were closed. And now here's an Ethiopian youth in North Dakota, which is pretty uncommon to begin with, laying right here on our countertop. And so to us, it was just kind of one of those, okay, well, we're going to inquire. We're going to see if this is for our family. And we truly, from that moment we saw that picture, we just had that like gut instinct that she was going to be in our family.
Yeah.
And sure enough, she was. It was a process. She was older and had gotten some really hard things in life. And so she was at a point in her life where she did not want to be adopted. But her caseworkers and her team knew it was best for her. So they kind of tried, in a sense, talking her into it. She agreed to come move to our house, but did not agree to adoption. Those first 6 months, I mean, she was kicking and screaming. We laugh about it now, even with her, because she was so anti our family, anti-adoption, anti anything other than she thought she was going to emancipate. That was her goal. She wanted to emancipate at 16. Well, little did she know that North Dakota does not have emancipation. And so that wasn't an option for her. And so, we had a lot of days of many tears, and we, by God's grace, just wrapped around her. Our kids wrapped around her. We let the process be very slow. And within probably 4 months, she was adopted a little over 6 months later. So probably 4 or 5 months in that process of those 6 months, her heart was softened and changed, and she chose adoption. We at that age, we can't force them to be adopted. We can't choose that for them, but she chose adoption on her own.
Nice.
And so she was adopted at age 15. And she, now 19 years old. And again, I just can't imagine our family without her.
No, I do remember being in North Dakota during that time when she was living with you. I don't believe that you had adopted her yet. And so I do remember it kind of being a struggle. So it's such a joy, though, to see now, that puzzle piece stuck in the right place in your family. Thanks for watching part 1 of my interview with Courtney Williams and their incredible journey of adoption, going from 3 of their natural born children to now having 9 children in their home on a regular basis. In part 2, we'll talk to Courtney about their continued journey with foster care in the state of Colorado. If you'd like more information on adopting or foster care, please check out the sites that I have put on your screen. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching today's episode of Light in the Shadow. Be sure to subscribe to this channel so that you can watch future videos. God bless.